He has found a path to legally include the citizenship question on the 2020 census. Barr did not go into specifics, but told reporters Monday he's found a workaround. He says the administration will take action in the following days. This comes after the Supreme Court ruled to block the question on the census. Meanwhile, a new team of government lawyers is being ushered in to take over the battle in court. The Justice Department announced that shift yesterday. Ryan Grimm is the Washington bureau chief for The Intercept. He's also the author of the new book, We've Got People. Ryan, thank you so much for being with us. Yeah. So Barr told the Associated Press there's an opportunity to, quote, cure the lack of clarity that posed a problem for the Supreme Court. Now, when you consider that statement and the change in the legal team, what does that signal to you about how aggressive Barr will be in trying to fight for adding that citizenship question?
I mean, it signals that they're flirting with just ignoring the Supreme Court. You know, in between Roberts and the four liberals ruling that it couldn't be part of the census, the president came out and said the specific reason that we want it on there is for the counting of congressional districts. In other words, so that Democrats would have smaller districts, so that you can suppress the number of immigrants and non-citizens who are participating in the census. He said the quiet part out loud, which is the thing that this president does. And what Roberts had said to them is that was his suspicion, that is why they wanted to include this question on the census, and that if they had some other reason, they had to come back with them soon and tell them what this other reason was.
But here's the problem. They've already stated their reason. So would coming back with another reason then be an obvious workaround?
It wouldn't, which is why the Department of Justice moved ahead and why the government was moving ahead to print the census forms without the question on it. They recognized that there was nothing that they could do, and that was before the president once again admitted the precise reason, the illegal reason for why they wanted to include this on the census.
So, Ryan, if the Attorney General is now saying that they may have a way of ignoring the Supreme Court and printing this question anyway, wouldn't that spark a constitutional crisis?
It would, but then the question is who's going to enforce that crisis. The speaker of the House is involved in an aggressive battle with her own caucus to try to tamp down any talk of impeachment, even while Trump continues to push the envelope on impeachable offenses. You know, aside from whatever the Mueller investigation was trying to suss out. You know, ignoring subpoenas, ignoring the rightful place of the legislative branch in the government, and now potentially also ignoring the place of the Supreme Court. But Speaker Pelosi appears quite committed to her position that she has no intention of impeaching Trump, and so maybe the Trump administration is seeing that and sees it as a green light, because then there are no rules that constrain a president if there are no consequences.
Well, so the president has suggested using an executive order to get this question printed. But can an executive order legally override the Supreme Court?
I mean, if it could, then what would be the point of the court or of Congress? Barr knows that you can't just issue an executive. The Supreme Court has issued a ruling. Well, we're just going to issue an executive order that says the opposite, and everything is going to be fine. The only time you can do that is if you don't have co-equal branches that are willing to stand up to you. That perhaps apocryphal quote from President Andrew Jackson when the Supreme Court ruled that he couldn't order the mass removal and genocide of Native Americans in Georgia. He said, "Okay, they've issued their ruling. Now let them enforce it." That may not have actually happened, but that appears to be kind of the same reasoning that Barr would be using here.
All right, so let's jump into the Democratic side of the aisle, because some of your recent reporting gets into the psychology of some of these Democratic leaders that you're pointing out are not willing to impeach. You say that older Democratic leaders are, quote, haunted by the Reagan era, adding that for newer members of the party's caucus, the older generation's fear of a backlash is befuddling. So, Ryan, what led to this type of divide within the party? Is it just the memory of the Reagan landslide?
I mean, that was a huge part of it, and I get into this more at length in my book. What people don't quite grasp about that particular 1980 election is that not only did Reagan, a C-list actor at the time, oust the sitting president, but Senate Democrats lost 12 seats, and they lost some of the kind of legendary lions who had been champions of some of the most significant progress that Democrats had made throughout the 20th century. It would be as if not only did Donald Trump win in 2016, but Chuck Schumer lost, Elizabeth Warren lost, Bernie Sanders lost, and all of these senators that people had heard of and had rallied around all lost their seats from kind of left, center, and right of the party. And so it really felt to people at that time that the world that they had come to understand as this kind of post-New Deal, post-World War II democratic world didn't exist anymore. And now it's this conservative country, it's a center-right country, and that if Democrats don't trim their sails, that they're going to get thrown out as harebrained liberals.
But as you point out, now there's a whole new wave of young Democrats, of young liberals who have no memory of this, and they find the whole thing, just like you said, befuddling. The Intercept was, along with us here at CBSN, one of the only media outlets to interview AOC before she won the primary. And I'm wondering if you think that upset, because it was so major, was that upset the turning point that really gave this younger generation of Democrats the opening they were looking for?
Well, I think it was, because not only did it bring Ocasio-Cortez into the House of Representatives and she continued to rise until becoming the kind of global political star that she is, but it took Joe Crowley, who was everybody thought was going to be the next Speaker of the House, out of leadership. So the other three members of the so-called squad all replaced men as well, but they replaced progressive men. This was a real kind of insurgent versus leadership fight, and she hasn't backed down, and neither have the rest of them since then. Interestingly, it often seems to be that it's the Speaker who initiates these back and forths, but this time Ocasio-Cortez has really risen to it and has kind of been pushing back pretty forcefully on Twitter.
So how do you then see this divide that you've highlighted? How do you see it impacting the 2020 primary field and beyond? Are the older Democrats right to be wary of going too far to the left? Is that a wise strategy? Or is this energy on the new, younger left really what's needed to push the party back into prominence?
And so the fear that a lot of these Democrats like Joe Biden have about coming off as not moderate enough is also, and not coincidentally, quite lucrative. So it may have evolved first as a fear of a genuine fear of a backlash, but then as it became a party strategy to kind of lean into Wall Street money, to lean into corporate money, to say that, okay, we're going to be moderate anyway, well, we might as well take all of this corporate money. At this point, it becomes kind of a self-justifying thing. And so Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez coming from the outside and saying, no, you don't need Wall Street to finance your campaigns. Regular people can do it. That threatens everything. That threatens the entire way that Democrats have of doing business. And so the fundraising numbers out now that show that Biden that show that Biden kind of fading when it comes to his fundraisings. If you take out that huge chunk he made right at the beginning, Elizabeth Warren raised more than him. Just behind Warren is Bernie Sanders, and they can keep going back to those regular donors. And what they're doing is presenting an alternative way of financing a political party. And if you don't need money from those big special interests, then all of a sudden you can start to craft a kind of multiracial, populist, progressive platform that pits workers against those capital interests.
It's certainly a new narrative for the party, and time will tell if it will take off. Ryan Grim of The Intercept, thank you so much for joining us.